Hi everyone, welcome to your last recitation video. So this is not going to be as long. This is just going to be a final review with a couple announcements. So your final exam is going to be Monday from the 18th to the 19th, and you're going to have a 24-hour time period. And I'm going to go more in detail about the exam and the logistics about that. The missed quizzes, if you have any missed quizzes, that's going to take place on December 13th, the last day of classes. I know the schedule on Canvas says December 14th. That's a mistake. The last day is December 13th. So if you have any missed quizzes, meaning let's say you forgot to take it, or you only did one attempt and you want to do the second attempt, but the quiz was closed, then those attempts will be available on December 13th from 6 a.m. to 11:59 p.m. But let's say you already took 2 attempts for all the quizzes, it's not going to be open for you. So it's only for people who missed or have attempts left. Okay, assignment 11, that is due December 13th. Make sure you have that in as soon as possible. The accept until date is December 14th. So if you're one day late or anything like that, you only have until December 14th to submit. Anything after that will not be counted. You'll just get a 0. So make sure you turn that in, especially if you use your free late pass. Make sure you know that using the free late pass means that you only get 1 day extra, whereas the other assignments you'd get 1 week extra. So make sure you get that in as soon as possible. Other than that, I looked through all the suggestions you guys had from the attendance form from last week, and most of you guys suggested the JavaScript functions, arrays, and loops because that's a more complicated part of the course, and I know a lot of you struggled with part of the assignment 8, I believe. So I'll go over that, and then just more recent stuff that you guys mentioned was Excel and pivot tables, SQL, and then a little bit of pseudocode and flowcharts. So I will see if I could try to get a little bit of everything. Again, if this video is not as in-depth that you like, feel free to go watch the previous recitation videos where I go through each topic more in depth. But other than that, first I want to cover information about the final exam. So if you go to files over here and you go to exam information, you're going to have these 3 files. If you click on final exam information, this file is going to pop up, the final exam format. So I'm just going to go through this. So if you have not completed the SIRS survey, or SEERS I think it's pronounced, you should do that. So that is important, so professor can get feedback on how the course is and things like that, so we can improve for next time onwards, and you do get 2 extra credit points. So submit it, and then there should have been a Google form that went out in a previous announcement. So make sure you complete it and submit a screenshot for proof of completion so I can give you your 2 points. Okay, so I said the final exam is going to happen next week. Okay, so if you have any problems during the final exam, it is being proctored, meaning if you have technical difficulties, there's going to be a spreadsheet that's posted like last time where you can see during what time what proctors are available, and it'll be a list of Google Meet or Zoom or WebEx links that you can see a TA in. Okay, if proctor is not available, then email one of the professors, whichever one you have. If you're an ODS student, then your extended time should be built into Canvas, so that should be already done. Okay, if you have an exam conflict, so since this is an online exam, to have an exam conflict for this exam, you have to have 2 exams beginning in the 24-hour time period, or 2 exams scheduled for the same exam period, or exam time period. So if you have that, then reach out to Professor Trees. She's the course coordinator, and then attach your final exam schedule, and then she'll coordinate with you on how to, make up for this exam or reschedule it. Okay, so for the final exam, it's going to be a little bit different than your normal final exams. This is going to be in 3 parts. and all 3 parts can be taken in any order in any time within the 24-hour time period. And the first part is going to be based on exam 1, 55 minutes. Second part is going to be based on exam 2, 65 minutes. And the third part is going to be based on everything covered after exam 2. So that is spreadsheets and databases. So any type of SQL code and Excel tables, pivot tables, Excel functions, all of that would be in part 3. Okay. Okay, so this part is just some common logistics of the exam. Once you start an exam or start a certain part of the exam, you can't pause and come back. You have to finish it. You only have 1 attempt. Don't use the tab key. What else? Obviously, no cheating. And only include concepts, or only write code for concepts that have been taught in class. I've noticed some people using concepts that have not been taught in class. So if you do that, you're going to get a 0. And there's like no questions asked after that. Okay. So the format for the exam, part 1 is going to be 55 minutes, and it's going to be a mix of multiple choice questions about bits, bytes, number conversions. There's going to be a short essay, and then there's also going to be a question on writing HTML code. So when I mean essay, it's going to be like write a paragraph explaining something, not like a real 5-page MLA format essay, and not like that, just like a paragraph explaining something. Okay, the part 2 is going to be mostly on JavaScript and programming and coding, and you'll have questions like similar to exam 2, where we give you a second piece of code and they'll be like, okay, what's wrong with it? And you're going to have to be writing a JavaScript function as well. So make sure you know how to create a function and write the code inside the curly braces, and we'll go over that later. And the last part, it's going to be on Excel and databases. So this part, it's also going to be multiple choice and mostly essay type questions. Essay type, I mean explaining in 4 to 5 sentences the answer. So because you can't really download an Excel sheet, work on it, and then put it back, it's going to be like too much time going into an exam. So it's just like more of explaining what's going on. So for these, just make sure you understand the concepts and just the different steps in like making a pivot table or Excel table and things like that. Okay, the second chance policy. So this is for people who have either missed a certain exam and they contacted a professor and they have like a valid excuse for it, or this is for people who score higher on certain parts of the final exam. So let's say you missed exam 2 and it was like a valid reason, you were like sick in the hospital or something, and the professor's like, okay, you're going to use a second chance policy to make up for that. That means whatever grade you get in part 2 of the final exam, that will count for your exam 2 grade. But let's say you took all of exam 1, all of exam 2, and now you're taking the final, and let's say you score higher on the part 1 of the final exam than exam 1, then your higher score will be used for exam 1. So you can get a higher grade. And it's only going to be for one grade. Either exam 1 will be replaced or exam 2 will be replaced if it's higher, but not both. And it's only going to go from a certain flow, just from the final exam down to exam 1 or 2. It can't be like, oh, well, I scored like a 90% on exam 1, so I'm not even going to take the final part 1 exam. You can't do that. Then you're just going to get a 0 for a certain section of the final, and your grade's going to drop. So don't do that. Just make sure you complete all parts of the final, and I will work the logistics of adjusting your grade depending on if you get a higher score in a certain part. Okay. The resources for the final exam. So I'm going to be going through these resources as well to help you, but these links are going to take you to the practice exams that you had for exam 1 and exam 2. You should also refer to past quizzes, recitation videos, recitation exercises, recitation folders where I have slides and other files, things like that. So that's the end of this document. And so what I was talking to before is those links are going to take you over here. And I'm going to start with exam 1. So I think the first part was a little bit of pseudocode and flowcharts. Okay. So for pseudocode and flowcharts, let's bring up the slides. So here, if you look in the folder, I clicked on this recitation 5 folder, and it has a pseudocode reference guide. So make sure you go through this and you understand everything that's on here, because this goes through a lot of sample pseudocodes that will be really helpful. You might see things like this on the exam, and it's like common and very, very common ways of writing pseudocode and ways of attacking a problem with pseudocode. So make sure you understand everything that's going on in here. And okay, the slides. Okay, so for flowcharts, these are all the symbols. The oval is the start to end, start or end. So whenever you're starting a flowchart for a pseudocode, the starting and ending, you're just going to put the word start and end. Arrows, they're going to connect the shapes. The parallelogram, it's going to represent input and output things, meaning if you are reading a variable, when I say reading a variable, like let's say you are reading the value of revenues. If you're reading the value of revenues, which is a variable, you're reading the values of expenses, that's going to be an input parallelogram. This rectangle is going to be some sort of process or calculation. Let's say here it says calculate earnings. That meaning like earnings is revenues minus expenses. So that would go in here. I would actually suggest you write earnings is equal to revenues minus expenses instead of calculate earnings. So any type of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, any type of operation that's going on, that's going to go in the rectangle. Diamonds are going to be decisions, so decision diamonds. It's going to be some sort of question, and then the way you can easily write it is think of an if statement in JavaScript or in the pseudocode. If earnings is less than 500K. So you could write exactly if earnings less than 500K. These like 3-4 things, you could write that in here and that would be perfectly fine. And that could be easily copied into pseudocode as well. So whenever you see a decision diamond or need a decision diamond, think of an if statement. And this is output parallelogram. So the parallelogram, the shape itself is the same, but it also represents input and output. So whenever you're displaying a final value that's been calculated and done through, then you're just going to put it in a parallelogram, and then at the end you put the stop oval. Okay, so that is flowcharts. Pseudocode is very simple if you understand the flow of the flowchart, if you get that correct. Basically copy and just the words and the formatting into here. And make sure you have indentations. If you have an if statement, you do if, then, and then you indent whatever happens inside the if statement. If you don't put an if statement, at least put curly braces for the code that is inside. So over here, if earnings is less than 500K, then compute taxes at earnings times 20%. So you want to put, if I had to put curly braces, I would put curly, like opening curly brace here and a closing curly brace here. That is because you only want this code to execute for the if statement. If you want the else to execute, you could put curly braces around this line. So that is blocking off a section of the code for what you want to execute. Okay. And also there is much more leeway in pseudocode. There's no like exact answer, like even in flowcharts there's no exact answer. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but the traces have to match. Like they'll give you like a sample trace And if you can go through your flowchart and your pseudocode, and if you get to the same answer, then you're good. Another thing to remember is the difference between double equals and single equals. A lot of you guys messed that up, not just you guys, but students in general. Double equals is when you're checking the validity of something. So validity meaning here we're doing if the cardholder category is equal to true. So I mean, if the category is true, meaning you're checking the validity of the category, then you're going to do something. Single equals means you are assigning some sort of value. Like let's say in JavaScript you say var num is equal to 5, or num is equal to 5. Just that single equals, that is used for assigning a value. You're not going to say num equal 5. If you do that, then that's more like you're checking is num equals to 5. If I just say num is equal to 5, that means you're just telling. Okay? Okay, so that is it for pseudocode. Okay, so now let's go into JavaScript. So most of the questions were from JavaScript functions, loops, and arrays. So let's go to this one. Okay, so you want to remember this format. Function name and then parameters inside the parentheses. So the name, you can put whatever you want. You can name a function wherever you want. I mean, if they tell you to have a certain name, then make sure you have that certain name. Parameters. Parameters are things you need, or things a function needs for it to do the calculation. Like, let's say you're calculating the total amount of flowers in an array. Well, then you need to take that array as a parameter in here. So then you can do or run code on that array so you can return the total. If you don't have the array, then you can't do anything with this. So make sure you have the proper inputs inside the parameters. So if you want to relate it back to the flowchart that we were doing, the input parallelograms correlate to these parameters over here. Okay. Oh, another thing before I forget, this is a little bit different, but the difference between alert and document.write, make sure you just know this. They are both different things, even though they look similar. Alert is for a pop-up. So when you do like alert and then in parentheses some value or some string, it's going to pop up on a screen with like a little OK button. So that's a pop-up. The document.write, whenever you put document.write and then in parentheses some HTML code, that is going to rewrite the whole page. So it's going to tell the browser, okay, ignore every HTML or anything that you have on the browser right now. You're going to start rewriting it with what I give you in this document.write. So make sure you understand that. Calling a function. To call a function, you're going to put the function name and then the parameter inside of it. Now, why do we need to call a function? Like, let's say you created a function, right? Why do you call it? Well, that's the thing. If you created it, there's nothing else that's happening with it. You actually have to use it. To use it, you have to call it with a certain value. Like, if you want to find the cube of a number, and you've wrote a function called cuber, but to actually do the calculation, you have to call it. So you would do the name of the function, cuber, and then the parameter, my number. So you can say cuber, and then the value of my number is 7, so it's going to do 7 cubed, and then give you an answer. Okay. Okay, that is done. Okay, loops and arrays. Okay, an array, or this data structure, is kind of what tripped some people off, and I think it was in assignment 8 as well. Okay, so an array is a data structure. Think of like a block of Legos, almost like a line, a block of Legos. And the first one, we're going to give this thing called an index. And it's going to start at 0. So the first block is index 0. And let's say you have 5 blocks. So it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like this, right? Now, if you count the number of blocks, it's 5. But the index or the indices go from 0 to 4. Now that is important because when you reference the array in the for loop, you're going to have to reference using the indices. So how do you create an array? Let's say you already know what goes inside an array. You do var fruits is equal to, and then you can put the values. And then I'm going to do an example with this later as well. And then a loop. What is a loop? So we only learned one loop, which is a for loop. And it's going to have 3 things: the initializer, the condition, and the updater. Now these are all important. Why do you need these 3 things? Because this variable, var I is equal to 0, that is going to be like a pointer in our array. And it's going to visit each and every element. So we have like 5 elements. And it's going to be like a little pointer that goes like, okay, let's go through this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. That's the point of the for loop. And that's how it searches through and executes code on each element. So let's do an example. Let me just bring up Sublime. Okay, and let me just save this sample.js. Okay, so let's say I wanted to create a function that can't spell. Create a function that creates the average of numbers in an array. So if you know how to do this, I suggest you to pause and do it and then check your answer at the end. So let's say they already gave you how to create they already gave you the array. So we're just creating a function. You're going to do name the function first. So let's say it can be anything else. Average func. So we have made a function and it's going to take a parameter. Now, what parameter would we need for a function that's creating an average of the numbers inside the array? Well, you need the access to the array itself. So we're going to put in an array, let's say nums. Now, we have the function name, we have the parameter, which is an array called nums. Now we need to loop through this to visit each element, and we're going to calculate a total. So for var I is equal to 0, I is less than nums.length, I plus. Now, what this is doing is it's creating a pointer called I, and it's going to say, I want you to run whatever code we write in here for the amount of times where I is still less than nums.length. So let's just say nums is an array, and it's equal to 5, 3, 7, 6, or let's do 8. 5, 3, 7, 8, okay? So, maybe the problem itself told us it's an array, it's equal to 5, 3, 7, 8. So now we know it has a length of 4, but we're not going to just exactly hard code and write while I is less than 4. We're just going to say nums.length. So that means this is going to execute all the way from where I is equal to 0 until it's less than 4. Now, when would I be less than 4? What's the last part of it? Well, the greatest number I can be less than 4 is 3. Now let's say it tries to do I++ after it gets I equal to 3, then it's going to say 4 is less than 4. Obviously that's not true, and that's exactly when the loop is going to stop. So now, to create the total inside the for loop, we need a variable that's going to hold that total for us. So let's do a var sum is equal to 0. So if I just do var sum and put a semicolon here, that's called just declaring a variable. If I do var sum is equal to 0, that's called declaring and initializing. So initializing is going to be when you set it equal to a default value. So you need to declare and initialize before you use this, or you're going to get errors like NaN, which stands for like not a number, or you're going to get undefined or something like that. So while you're looping through the array, you're going to do sum is equal to sum plus nums of I. Or you can do sum plus equals nums of I. Now both of these do the exact same thing. The first one, what that does is it says, okay, you're going to take the variable sum. Right now it's set to 0. And then you're going to add the value at nums of I. So now what is nums of I? So right now in the loop, I is equal to 0. So in the first iteration where I is equal to 0, this is going to say nums of 0. So nums of 0 means the 0th index in the nums array. So now, okay, so what's at the 0th index? Well, that's the first element. The first element is 5. So it's going to say, oh, so you want 5, and you're going to add that to sum. Well, sum is still equal to 0 right now. So 5 plus 0 is equal to 5. So that is going to be the first thing that happens. 5 is equal to 0 plus 5. Now, sum becomes 5. Now it's going to become I++, so 0, if you increment it by 1, it's going to become I is equal to 1. So now let's say, what's nums of 1? Well, the first index is the second element. So that's 3. So then it's going to be like, okay, well, sum already has the value of 5, and we know nums of 1 is 3, so 5 plus 3 is equal to 8. Now it's going to keep on doing that, it's going to add 7, and it's going to add 8, right? Both of these lines are the exact same thing. This is just a shortcut, so you don't have to write the word sum twice. So just do either or. And once it goes through all of the loop, then what we're going to do is we're going to create the average. So to create the average, let's just create a variable called var avg for average. And how to create the average, that is the total divided by the number of elements. So the total is going to be the sum, because that's what we calculated, divided by the number of elements, which is going to be nums.length. And then after here, you can just return average. Now this would be an example of something they could ask. Like if they say, write a JavaScript function that creates the average of the numbers in an array, this would be something you would have to do. Now it could definitely get more complicated, and more complicated examples are in here. Let me find it. It's in the exam 2 information folder, I believe. It's all the way at the bottom. Okay. So if you have trouble with JavaScript arrays and loops, I want you to go through this. And I'm just going to explain a couple of things here. So given this array, var cars is equal to new array of 9, which is the following is a valid way of accessing a value within the array. So I think I went through this problem before, but which one is a valid way? So cars of 9 is not valid because if there's 9 elements in an array, you cannot access the 9th index. When you go from 0 to 8, if there's 9 elements, because that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 9 elements. So you can't answer access the 9th index, that's going to be out of bounds. Cars of 7.5, you cannot access a half index, it's only going to be whole numbers. Cars of 10, that if 9 is out of bounds, then obviously 10 is going to be out of bounds, so the answer is going to be cars of 0. So that's going to meaning it's accessing the first element in the array. Okay, so here, this is what we kind of just did to, this is getting the total of an array. We did getting the average. This one is if you want to get the highest number. So to get the highest number, what they did was, okay, ignore this extra semicolon, but what they did was they created a function called getHigh. Wrong choice of words. And they put in a parameter called r, and they create a variable, var high is equal to r of 0. So that means they're just creating a variable and they're setting it equal to the first element in the array, so the 0th index. So they want to say, let's just assume the first element is the highest number, and then we're just going to compare everything against that first one. So they're going to say, okay, starting at the first index, meaning the second element, and until it's less than the length, you're going to execute this code. If r of I is greater than high, high is equal to r of I. So if the certain element that you're on right now, if that's greater than the one we saved as the highest one, then you're going to say, okay, well then the one you just found, save that as your new high number. So let's just look at, let's just copy paste this actually. Okay, doesn't want to copy paste. Okay, looks very ugly as you can see. Okay. Okay, so in here, if you want to get the highest value, let's say we have an array called and we already saved it as r, and that's equal to 2847. So now we obviously know that the highest number is 8, but we want a JavaScript function to figure that out. So what it's going to do, it's going to save the first element, and it's going to put it into a variable called high. So the first element, or the 0th index, is 2. So that's basically saying right now, high is equal to 2. Now it's going to start at the first index, meaning the second element, and it's going to compare it to the first one, then it's going to go here, compare it to this one, and then go here, compare it to, it's going to go here, compare it to this one. Then depending on if it's bigger or not, then it'll go to the next one, and then it'll either compare to this one if this one is bigger, or if 2 is bigger, it'll compare it to the 2. But obviously we know 8 is bigger. So what that means is, if r of I is greater than high, so right now r of I is this, the first index, meaning second element. If the second element is greater than the first element, then you're going to say, okay, well, then the new highest element is going to be whatever you found which was greater. So here, high is going to become 8. And then it's going to do it again. Okay, if this next element is greater than the highest one, then you can replace it. But is 4 greater than 8? No. So it's just not going to execute this line of code and then go here again. Okay, well, is 7 greater than 8? No. So it's not going to execute this, and it's just going to end the loop because we finished the array, and it's just going to return high. So that is kind of a more in-depth explanation. There's more examples here. So feel free to go through that and email me if you have any questions or have any doubts. Now, this question is another thing that a lot of people got wrong, I think, on one of the quizzes. But let's say you're given the following code and you want to calculate what the final value of A, B, C, and D is. So right now they're saying var A is equal to 1, B is equal to 3, C is equal to 4, and then they declare D, and then they initialize D to be calcNow, so they're calling the calcNow function with the values A, B, and C. Okay, so to calculate D, we need to actually refer to this function. So A, B, and C are going to correlate correspondingly to X, Y, and Z. So we know A, B, C was 1, 3, 4, so X, Y, Z is 1, 3, 4. So that's kind of what they say here. 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. Now just forget about everything you see here now. Now let's just go through the code here. It declares a variable called A and B. Notice these A and B's have nothing to do with these A's and B's. These variables only have the scope of this function. So I'm allowed to, or the person is allowed to make a variable of the same name with a different scope. That means it's almost like a different variable. So don't get confused. This variable has a different scope. So they created two variables, A and B, whatever. Now they're saying A is equal to X minus 1. Okay, well, what is X? X is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. Okay, so remember, A is equal to 0. B is equal to Y plus 3. Okay, what's Y? 3. So 3 plus 3 is 6. Okay, A is equal to 0, B is equal to 6. Now they said C is equal to A plus B. Okay, so what is A plus B? 0 plus 6, which is 6. Okay, so we have a 0, 6, and a 6. Now return A plus B minus C. What is A plus B? A plus B is 6. 6 minus C, which is already 6, is 0. And now this function is going to return 0, and that's going to be stored over here, and that's going to initialize var D, D is equal to 0. That's why down here D is equal to 0, and since we made C into 6 over here, that gets changed to 6. But A and B stay the same. They are stayed 1 and 3. So that's because the value of A and B is never changed. That's because the value of X and Y is never changed. X and Y are used to update other variables, but the value of themselves never changed. So those will stay the same. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's see, what else do we have? So that was loops and arrays. Okay, spreadsheets. Pivot tables, Excel tables, and a little bit of SQL. Okay, so these are just going to be more conceptual stuff to go through slides. Okay. So spreadsheets. Okay, a lot of spreadsheets should be self-explanatory. The main things you want to remember are absolute referencing and just absolute referencing and regular referencing. Absolute referencing is whenever you have the $sign in front of it. So that would be over, where'd it go? Like this. If I say $sign A, $sign 18, that means you want that specific cell for all of them. Okay. And then make sure you know the different types of functions. Like the max, min, sum, get total, the today function. So those were all covered in the assignments in the previous recitation video, so make sure you know those. Make sure you know what, like wrapping, resizing, how to make the Excel table. If you're making Excel or pivot table, it's very simple. You're just going to click on any cell and then you go to insert and then you choose either the regular table or pivot table. So that is pretty self-explanatory. And then obviously you guys know the copy paste and then undo, redo. For the spreadsheets part, that's more of just understanding the different steps of how to make and just the concept behind it. They're not going to ask you to be like, okay, make this pivot table or something like that. Okay. Okay, so making the pivot table, I just explained that you click on any cell and then you click insert and then you use either a pivot table if you make pivot table or Excel table. Now, when you get the pivot table field screen on the right hand side of your computer, you're going to see different fields. And that is important when you're trying to make a certain type of table with a certain type of rows and certain type of columns. So you'll see filters, columns, rows, and values, I think. So usually the assignments give you exactly what to do. They'll be like, put this field as a column, put this field as a row, and filter it by the ship field or something like that. So that is very self-explanatory. Go through the assignments. If you have questions on like what you did wrong in your assignments, I always leave comments. But email me if there's like something specific you don't understand. Okay. And then for Excel tables, Excel table is basically the same thing, except any filtering that you're going to do is going to be all the way at the top. So at the top, once you make the table into an Excel table and it shows up all color-coded in the blues and grays, then there's going to be a little arrow on the top header cell. And then you can click that arrow and then it'll give you a drop down of things you can filter by. And then you can filter by everything that is with a date greater than April 20th of 2013, or the count of bouquets is greater than 10. So you can filter by different values. So just make sure you know how to do that. And important thing is, whenever you're writing some sort of equation, make sure you put an equal sign in front and then reference the cells. Like if you want to do equal to B8 times A8, you need the equal to in front or else it's not going to save as a calculation. Again, if you want like more in-depth, watch previous recitation videos. They should be fully accessible. Okay, and then the last part is already getting kind of long. The SQL part. SQL, this is definitely confusing if you are not, let's see, if you didn't have exposure to SQL before or working with databases might get confusing, and especially if you didn't understand JavaScript that much. It is easier than JavaScript, but with the nested queries on the assignment, it might get a little bit confusing. Okay, so for SQL, remember the basic SQL commands: select, insert to, update, delete, and union. And a lot of SQL is kind of like you read it how it is. Like you want to create a table, you write create table, and then whatever the name of the table is. And inside here, you're going to have the name of the fields, like the different columns. And then you're going to have the data type. So int means a number. Varchar means the number of characters in that string. So here it says varchar 100. That means I want to just allot 100 characters for a string to store the first name of the customer. And then it continues. If you want to add to tables, you're going to use insert into, and then after the values keyword, you're going to put all of the values you want to put in order of how the table was designed with its fields. So if it's customer ID and first name, last name is in that order, you want to do that in that order. You don't want to put the country and then first name, last name, then it's going to mess the whole thing up. Okay, primary keys and secondary keys. Primary key is the main important one that you should know. It is a unique identifier for every row in that table. So every customer will have their own ID, and that's usually their primary key. Okay, and then functions is very similar to Excel function, just the basic functions. Okay. Oh, and if you go to this module section over here, you can, let's do student view. Okay, in the module section, you're gonna see different practice worksheets. So if you don't remember, like decimal to binary, binary to decimal conversions, you can have conversions worksheets, and then you can see the solutions in the files as well. And go through all of these resources, and then obviously the professor posts tutorials as well. So go through all of those, the reference sheets for HTML and JavaScript and Pseudocode. Those are all very important because it's like a lot of information, kind of like cheat sheets all put together in one. So I definitely recommend you look over those as well. Okay, so I guess I'm going to stop there. That's all I have for you for this semester, and I want to say I really enjoyed teaching you. This was my first time being a TA, and I'd like to thank you for watching my videos, for those of you who consistently watch, and for those of you that forgot to but came back at the end. I really appreciate all your feedback, and I hope I at least tried to live up to some of what you were expecting. And just thank you for letting me be your TA, I guess. And I hope you have a good holiday and good Christmas break, and good luck on your final exam. Have a good day. Bye.